Hi, this is Julie with a quick note before we begin. This marks the last and final episode of Season 7 of the Mother's Quest podcast. The podcast will take a break until it returns with Season 8 in time for Mother's Day. Until then, make sure to sign up for our email list at mothersquest.com and join the free Facebook group at mothersquest.com/community, where I'll continue to share resources and updates about all the good things coming. I also want to share a quick heads up that my podcast guest, Eve Rodsky, speaks in powerful ways. And sometimes that includes a few carefully chosen bad words. So I encourage you to listen to this episode in privacy or to pop in some earbuds if you are with your children. Now on to this special finale episode that I co-hosted with my sister, Democracy Clothing's founder, Caren Lettery, featuring the amazing New York Times bestselling author and change maker, Eve Rodsky. Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to two high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I? Welcome to the special Season 7 finale episode of the Mother's Quest podcast, released on International Women's Day 2023. It feels like just right timing to bring this conversation to you, but the seeds for this episode have been germinating since last spring, when Jill Daniel of Happy Women Dinners came to me with an invitation. She asked whether my sister Caren, founder of Democracy Clothing, might be interested in hosting a brunch at her house in Los Angeles with bestselling author Eve Rodsky. I had recently learned about Eve's groundbreaking work, where she transformed her own blueberries breakdown into a catalyst for social change, applying her Harvard-trained background in organizational management to ask the simple yet profound question: what would happen if we treated our homes as our most important organizations? Her New York Times bestselling book and Reese's book club pick, Fair Play, a gamified life management system that helps partners rebalance their domestic workload and reimagine their relationship, has elevated the cultural conversation about the value of unpaid labor and care. In her highly anticipated follow-up, Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World, Rodsky explores the cross-section between the science of creativity, productivity, and resilience. Her journey and the tenets of both books came together in the Fair Play documentary, a film by Jennifer Siebel Newsom in partnership with Hello Sunshine. Needless to say, I encouraged Caren to say yes to this opportunity. We knew there would be synergy between Caren's journey creating her hugely successful unicorn brand, Democracy Clothing, while raising two children and running a household, and Eve's message. Jill gathered an incredible community of women for that day. We gifted all of them with size-inclusive Democracy jeans and a try-on experience that was uplifting and empowering, and a conversation between Jill, Caren, and Eve that was profound. When Eve said yes to being a guest on my podcast and it came time to interview her, I knew I wanted to include Caren in this conversation. What follows is an intimate look at the values and insights Eve has woven into her two books, and an exploration of what Eve has learned about living an epic life. As Eve shares at the end of this episode, the Mother's Quest podcast and this conversation between the three of us is also unicorn space. We are so grateful to share it with you and hope that what you hear sparks a reclamation of your own. Conversations with your own partner and children that bring to light and make more fair the division of labor in your household, and that you use this as a permission slip for yourself to reclaim your own time and creativity in your epic life. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Here now to lead us into the interview is another change-making woman and mother, Bridget Coulter-Cheadle, who joined us at the brunch Caren hosted and inspires us with her own unicorn project, the Blackbird House and Blackbird Collective.
I am Bridget Coulter-Cheadle, mother, wife, producer, curious creative, engineering-minded, design-forward, and community-focused. I am a philanthropist and serial social impact entrepreneur, most recently founder of Blackbird Collective, a network of entrepreneurs, practitioners, content creators, and change makers gathered in an inspired space designed for shared work, well-being, creativity, and advocacy. Blackbird is a soulful place in a material world. I am dedicating this episode of Mother's Quest to my beloved late grandmother, my beautiful aunties, and my down-ass mama, whose fierce love, accountability, and brilliance made me who I am and serve as inspiration for my work and life. I met Julie and Caren at a Happy Woman brunch that my dear friend Lori had invited me to. Eve Rodsky happened to be the special speaker for the day. As Blackbird magic would have it, I had just come from a founder's dinner that also celebrated Eve, and getting to see her again, speaking deeply about passion and purpose with authoring Fair Play and Unicorn Space was simply dope. Her creative yet scientific data-driven process for illuminating the inequitable burden of care that women carry in relationships was something that I wish I had known growing up. Through sharing her personal story, she sought to address gender equity in a practical way. In listening to her, I immediately felt a kinship to what I considered a shared mission for transformational change for women in work and life. And then, as someone who loves board games, I was especially struck by her use of simple game cards to broaden familial recognition of the disparities in caretaking responsibilities. So, when the ladies asked me to do the dedication for Eve's podcast episode, I wanted to make it happen. Thank you, Julie and Caren, for your incredible patience with my entrepreneurial schedule and for telling these stories on your mother's quests for a better way. Now, to your listeners, enjoy this episode. Eve is a badass who's changing the game.
Eve, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. It's such an honor to have you here. We've been waiting a little while. The stars have aligned, and Caren and I are both so excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, Julie, thank you. What a nice introduction.
So, Care, on to you.
Yes, I'm just really thrilled that we're back together again. I love your energy and your passion and your commitment. And I just want to dive right into the first question that Julie asked all of her guests, which is, tell us about your life as a child and the impact that your mother had in shaping who you are today.
Oh, I love that question. I was actually thinking a lot about my mother now because we're in the sandwich generation and she just got COVID for the first time. So I was thinking about her this morning and I was texting her, take your Paxlovid or whatever. But, you know, my mother, it's an interesting thing, Caren and Julie, right? I didn't start out to be an expert on the gender division of labor, right? That wasn't what was on my third grade. What do you want to be when you grow up board? We were very sort of surviving at that point. My mother's a single mother. My father left shortly after my brother was born. We had lived in Virginia. And as my mother said, she took 2 suitcases and 2 babies, 3, and my brother was 6 months, and threw us in the backseat of a car, drove us to New York. And we ended up in a rent and stabilized apartment on a social worker's salary in the Lower East Side, Avenue C and 14th Street. And so what I remember about my childhood was as early as 8 or 9 years old was just being what psychologists now call a parental child, understanding that my mother had too much on her plate and we had to help her help us. And so that was how I got control of my life in a chaotic time. As we saw eviction notices coming under our door and late utility bills, I started to become my mother's helper.
I was so struck by the story that you told in the documentary about this experience and the ways in which it started at an early age, instilling in you this belief that you could do everything, that you could take it all on. And that definitely impacted your early motherhood experience.
Absolutely. Remember, I'm resolutely Gen X. So I grew up in the Reagan era of rugged individualism. And so we heard about the New Deal and blah, blah, blah. But really, the 80s was about a time where everybody was told to hate government that if you didn't rise up by your bootstraps, that you were a failure. And so I was led to believe that everything was education. If I put my head down and worked hard, got scholarships, took out exorbitant amount of loans, that I could make it out, that I could do things on the same footing as men. And I was really sold that lie. And it really did impact me in my later life because I didn't think to ask for help. That was in my generation, or at least in my life, where I was responsible for my disabled brother and caretaking for my mother. In many ways, I never thought that I should ask for help.
I'm curious about understanding, like I know that in the documentary you shared that your mother had 2 jobs and couldn't organize her time to pay the bills on time. And so you just assumed that role and responsibility. I'm curious about what sparked that switch of initiative inside you. And did you separate in that moment, being a child or a daughter, or did you just have this innate survival of the fittest kind of instinct to just step in to help ensure that your nuclear family and your mother and your brother had the support? Did you ever feel unsupported in that moment?
Well, it's a great question because I think only in reflection and in my second book, which is about, my first book is, as you know, and we'll talk about, is about inviting men into their full power in the home so that women can step out into their full power in the world. But my second book is really about looking at our identities, our roles. And I think the one thing that really connects women across the globe is that at some point we'll be identified as a role, right? Whether it's a mother or a sister or a daughter or a friend, women are taught to be in service of those roles in a way that men just aren't. And so I think early on, I understood my role as a daughter wasn't to be taken care of. It was to caretake. And again, I think that was a pattern that lasted through my life, which was to recognize and to see what was happening around me in a way that most other kids, or many other kids, or, kids with more privilege probably have an easier transition into their own adulting. Mine started at 7.
I want to use this as a good segue into talking about living an epic life and the epic life framework, which is going to serve as the foundation for the questions we're going to continue to explore with you. I'm resonating a lot with stepping into the role and how that really impacts us. I have a now 18-year-old son who just started college, but under the age of 2, he was diagnosed with autism. So many of my early years of motherhood were shaped by being in a major advocacy role, maybe not dissimilar from the way that you had to step in and support your brother. And then I had years of infertility before I had my second child. And what happened for me about 10 years into my motherhood journey is I kind of woke up and felt like, what happened to a decade of my life? In so many ways, it was deeply enriched, and I had grown parts of myself. And of course, I loved my kids. But in that experience, I also felt like I had lost a lot of parts of myself. And particularly, I had lost a sense of what I'm here to do in the world beyond my role as a mother, and also any sense of my own creative expression or my creative voice. So when I started to read your book about unicorn space, for me, just so much of it resonated. And I felt like, oh my God, this is exactly what I felt like you were articulating, so much of what I was trying to name in saying that I wanted to live my epic life. So I want to move into that to share more about what do you mean by finding our unicorn space, whether and how that relates to this idea of living our version of an epic life, and what you're most on a quest for right now.
Well, I love your framework so much, Julie, because it aligns literally so closely to the framework of unicorn space. Now, I'll just tell you a little story about where I came to, right? Because I had these big dreams, as we talked about. I really did. And I really thought I was going to smash many glass ceilings along the way. I remember writing in my journal that I was going to be president and senator and Nick City dancer all at the same time. And I should have been able to do those things. But really, as you said, Julie, the reality was that the things I was smashing 10 years after I wrote in my journal that I was going to be all those, I had those big dreams, was really peas. I was smashing, peas for my toddler, Zach, while breastfeeding a baby, a newborn baby, Ben at the time. What was so profoundly hard about living an epic life was the sense of isolation. It's very hard to live an epic life without the sense of community. And I remember the first thing that I lost was my husband, right? I talk about that a lot in Fair Play. He was sending me texts like, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And I was breaking down on the side of the road because I had become the default, or as I call in Fair Play, the she-fault for literally every single household and domestic task for my family, including apparently being the fulfiller of my husband's smoothie needs. So I was losing sort of his partnership. And we know that scientifically what happens, that in women married to men do 5 to 15 hours a week less after kids come in terms of chores, housework, and childcare. So I didn't know that at the time. So I was losing him. And then I was losing my work too, because on my maternity leave with Ben, my workplace told me that I had lost all my direct reports and they were going to my colleague. And I liked my colleague, but it just felt so horrible. Well, we're going to make your job easier. And that was one of my biggest goals, was to have a team to manage. So it felt really spiteful and mean that it was taken away and given to a woman without children. And then I was told that my lactation area was this beautiful area called the broom closet. And so I left. I thought that I left. I mean, I was forced out. I say that to all women now. You're forced out of the career of a workplace if those are things that are happening to you, which they are in most super majority of places. So I had lost my husband in terms of the abandonment. I had lost my workplace in terms of the abandonment. And then I kept hearing, well, just wait till your child gets to kindergarten, then you're going to have time back. You'll have this great community, or wait till they enter preschool, blah, blah, blah. And so I did wait. And I remember I had lost Seth in terms of his support. I had lost my job in terms of their support. And then I get to this toddler transition program where these parents were supposed to be the secret sauce to my living a better life. And the preschool teacher said to me, look around, this is going to be your social safety net. She didn't say it like that, but the people who will take care of you, you'll be at their bar mitzvahs, you'll be at their weddings. They'll get your kid in a pinch if you need to carpool them. And I look around at all these people, and she's saying that they're going to know me better than anyone's ever known me. And I looked down at my name tag, Julie and Caren, and it said Zach's mom. And so then I remember thinking, these are the people that are going to know me better than anyone's ever known me. They don't even know my fucking name. And so not only did I not have the overwhelm, I didn't have the support system of Seth. I didn't have the support system of my workplace. The support system that I was supposed to rely on in terms of my community, they didn't even know me. They know me as a role. And so how can you live an epic life when women are so far behind the starting line, where we're dying of decision fatigue? We're literally in an acid rainstorm of overwhelm and decision fatigue, especially if you have a special needs child. And then on top of that, there's such profound erasure of our identity, of who we are in that decade. What I want to say is we have to fight for an epic life. You have to fight for it, because there is disinterest and discomfort from other people when you try to claim that life. And we just have to accept that. Your children are not going to give you cartwheels when you say you want to go off for a week on a writing retreat, right? Your partner, when you tell them that you want them to be the ones who pick up the kids from school when they're sick and do groceries, you're not going to hear, yes, I've been waiting for you to ask for that. You're going to hear a lot of, okay, sure, I guess if, and that discomfort is really the first step to an epic life, that we deserve a permission to be unavailable from these roles, and to fight for that permission takes power and unlearning, which is what we're doing today.
Every single word you say just resonates so deeply with me. The word that I used often in my saying yes to Mother's Quest and my epic life journey has been reclamation. And I see that in your mission and your quest is your own personal reclamation, but then how you are really bringing to light all of the systemic reasons that it's so hard for so many women and mothers. So I'm really just so grateful for your own awareness as you were in this experience in your life, and then the ability that you had to do something about sharing that and bringing it to light for so many other mothers.
Well, I love reclamation because I think that's really the key to what fair play is about. Fair play is a movement, and it's a movement to reclaim our time. It's a movement to say that assumptions about how I use my time should not be set by society. As one woman said to me, Julie, she said what fair play has taught her and taught her partner is that she doesn't have a magical vagina that whispers to her at night what her husband's mother wants for Christmas. That is the point of fair play, right? There is no magical vaginas whispering to us about how to wipe asses and do dishes. We're not better multitaskers. There's no gendered difference in how we multitask. When we say to ourselves, and the time it takes me to tell him, her, they what to do, I should do it myself. When we say to ourselves, I do more unpaid labor, I pick up the kids from school because my partner makes more money than me. When we say to ourselves, yes, we're both two colorectal surgeons, but I can find the time and my partner is better at focusing on one task at a time. All of those toxic time messages are the exact opposite of reclamation. What they're doing is they're keeping us stuck. They're allowing society to choose how we use our time. And so if you believe, or your partner believes you have the magical vagina that tells you what his mother wants for Christmas, then you're going to be the one researching and wrapping and buying the gift for his mother for Christmas. And in those 2 hours, you could have been using that dancing, painting, reclaiming time choice over how you use your time. And so the more we can say no to unpaid labor and the assumptions that we're going to do it all, or the majority, the super majority of it, the more we can say yes, as you were saying earlier, to this epic life, to this framework that leads to thriving.
Caren, what is all of this bringing up for you as you're listening?
Well, I'm just thinking about that because it really resonates with me. As you know, I've had a career that's had a career. I mean, when we try to incorporate all the things that we do professionally, personally, as mothers, remember doing the 7 habits of highly effective people and writing all of my roles on a piece of paper. And there were like 10 roles and none of them said person. And it made me cry, that feeling. And I think as women, when I think about your childhood and how you stepped into that role, and then I think about what you're saying about are females more suited to multitasking versus males. But I reflect on, I have a son and a daughter, and in raising my children, I don't think I had the same expectations of my son in terms of awareness of how to contribute and support in some of that invisible work in making our home life happen for all of us. And I think it's really important to teach that to our kids and to have that equality in terms of conscious awareness, because I see if we are raising children for leadership in the world, they need to be equipped to handle things. And even if nobody is more oriented toward multitasking, let's face it, we are like spitball firing multitaskers. That's what it takes. We're stimulated on so many levels in terms of how we orchestrate our life personally, professionally, emotionally, that it's really essential to teach those traits to everybody that we're responsible for nurturing and raising. And I think that's where the difference can be made for this next generation, in addition to trying to impact those that are already like on the playing field.
What's so beautiful about what you're saying, Caren, is that you're willing to say that out loud. When I started this project in 2011 to start interviewing women, men, LGBTQIA folks about their family structures, what I found was that so many feminists were afraid to talk about what you just said, right? That maybe they didn't expect as much from their sons, or maybe their partner isn't doing as much in the home. There was so much shame on the woman that if she, quote unquote, allowed this imbalance to happen, that it was her fault, that I had a really hard time with women talking to me, because they would say things like, well, my son is great, but, or my partner is great, but, I'm like, I know, I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just talking about your life, your burnout, your career. How can we understand that this is a partnership? And so it was so hard to get even the conversation going, because there's so much shame for women if they admit to themselves that their home is not fair, even though it's not our fault.
And especially as assertive women who are accomplished as you are and as I am in terms of my professional life, it's very difficult to weigh the balance and to not consider it elective or to prioritize yourself as an individual. I think it's a fallback role that I certainly fell into, which was in order to have this full-fledged career that took so much of my time and effort, that my role as a mother would be viewed as compromised and feel compromised if I didn't find this magical 10 gear shifts in order to accomplish all these other things that were part of our typical expectation of a mother's role or a wife's role in a household. So I think it's really liberating to see how you have, through Fair Play, brought those conversations to light in a way that is empathetic. And I think especially to have empathy towards men, to give them space, because if they didn't grow up with those kinds of role models modeling what their expected behavior in terms of contributing could be, they really need that guidance. And I think your Fair Play structure really helps re-educate and put them on that path where they can see what that role is that they can step into. And it gives structure and guidance that makes it possible.
Well, thank you for that. It was definitely started with me search. They call research me search, right? Where Seth was my first beta tester. But what I will say was that the number one issue I heard from women about why they hated home life was that they were overwhelmed. The number one issue I heard from men about why they hated home life wasn't that they were being nagged or asked to do dishes. It was, I don't know my role. Every time I try to do something, I do it wrong. So I might as well not do it at all. And that is just as bad as being overwhelmed, because that's a lack of psychological safety in your most important organization, which is your home. And so when I was able to take what I've been doing for over a decade, which is I'm a lawyer and I look at the world in terms of design. How do you design systems to make things work in the way that you want them to? How do you design systems to make decisions? Lawyers, we do that all the time, right? If you want people to make the decision to stop at a stop sign, guess what you do? You pass a law that they stop at the stop sign. So I've been thinking about behavior design for over 20 years. And what I realized about Fair Play, when I could ask the question that I've been asking my workplace, which is I work with highly complex organizations that look like the HBO show Succession, and you should both feel bad for me. But what I do for those families is I bring some grace and humor and generosity to the most highly complex decisions these families have to make, because I use a formula of what I call boundaries, systems, and communication. And once I realized that I could bring the same boundary, systems, and communication to my family, even though we weren't making highly complex organizational decisions on family businesses, we were just making decisions on a daily basis about our family. Once I realized that that boundary, systems, and communication formula could work, then that's what Fair Play became. It became a system of ownership. It became that addressed men and their role, saying that they didn't know their role. It became a boundary issue around time choice that we started talking about, that women deserve to reclaim their time and they deserve a permission to be unavailable. And it became a communication system through the Fair Play cards for how to start having a shift in conversation from, oh, I never talk about domestic life, which I always laughed at, because starting 10 years ago, women would say to me, I don't talk about domestic life. It's too triggering. And the first time I heard that 10 years ago, the same woman said to me that she dumps wet clothes on her partner's pillow when he forgets to put them in the dryer. So what I like to say as a mediator is that we are already communicating. I could go onto your Nest Cam, Julie, and I'll see 10 ways you communicated about domestic life today without even having the sound on. But we're already communicating about these issues. It's just, we need a communication shift. It's not a start. It's just a shift, as you said, to invite our partners in, to invite our children in, to invite our community in, to move away from assumptions to these types of structured decision-making we're talking about.
What you've created with the deck of cards that you just mentioned, I think is really brilliant. And I want to move us into delving into the EPIC guideposts and begin to ask you about the impact of the deck, specifically in terms of engaging our own children. So first, just a brief overview. In addition to EPIC being this metaphor for living the kind of life that's filled with the things that matter most and where we are reclaiming our whole human selves, EPIC is also an acronym mnemonic for the guideposts that I felt like would help me to live that life, especially when I was raising my kids. So the first one, E, is about engaging mindfully with our children. I think one of the most favorite parts of the documentary for me is the closing scene where your son, Zach, is talking about the impact of you sharing your mission and your life with him and how that has started to change how he feels empowered in the home, how he was inspired by your husband. And I also love things that I've heard you share in other settings about ways that he inspires you in this really reciprocal relationship where we share our whole selves with our kids. We both inspire them and are inspired by them. So I'd love to hear a little bit about engaging mindfully with our kids and the ways that you have found talking about the invisibility of labor and using the card deck with our kids can be transformative.
Absolutely. So fair play is a metaphor. It started as a should I do spreadsheet, as you know. And once I realized spreadsheets don't work, it became a system. And there's 100 cards. There's a card deck that accompanies the book. And really, it's a metaphor. It's a conversation cards. And the way we use these cards is different. It's not a keeping exercise of daddy does 2 cards and I do 98. It's not really meant to be used that way, although I'm sure some people with Resentometer 10 probably have used them that way. And I apologize if they have, but that's not the way they're meant to be used. This is really a tool to have conversations to show that the chores and housework that we're talking about, that we have assumptions over, really are our humanity. And so that is how I use the cards with my children. And what I mean by that is we start to tell each other our stories. So it could be fun. Let me do this with you. I'll pick you, Julie. I'm just going to shuffle the deck. And this is how I do it with my kids. We do it as sort of play.
Oh, I love that.
And we shuffle the deck. And then I just tell them a story about my childhood, or Seth does that, or Seth and I tell each other based on the card we pick. So I'm just going to shuffle until I pick one. Just tell me when to stop and I'll stop.
Okay, stop.
Okay. We got groceries. All right. Julie, any story that you can remember? What grocery store do you remember going to as a child? Did you ever go? Did groceries just magically appear in your refrigerator? Tell me anything you can remember about either a grocery store or how groceries got into your home as a child.
Okay, I can remember going, I think it was either Ralph's or Alpha Beta. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. This was Northridge. I would go shopping with my mom.
Dale's.
Or Dale's. Funnily enough, I mean, this doesn't necessarily relate to labor, but the thought that came to me just thinking of a grocery store memory is...
And by the way, it's not about labor. It's just the memories. Yeah. So
it just creates an opportunity to talk about these things. I remember seeing a set of magnetic paper dolls that I really wanted for myself. And I probably asked my mom for them and she said no. And I threw them into the basket and she didn't notice that they got rung up, but she did unpack them. And I was not a kid that usually got into some trouble, but she was very upset with me. And she made me go back to the supermarket to return the magnetic dolls and apologize to the person who worked there.
Wow. So that's a really interesting memory. And again, I feel like the psychological safety of being able to share about these issues means that we're not oversharing to the point where Julie would regret sharing with me, but we will become closer from these conversations. And I'll always think about those dolls. We all have a situation, I'm sure, like that. My mother used to drink cans or open licorice in the store and just leave the wrappers there. So I thought that was okay until I was in Martha's Vineyard when I was 13 and I got written up for shoplifting because I drank a can of soda and I just left it in the store. I thought that was okay, that you could eat whatever you want as long as you were in the store, because my mother used to do that. Oh my God, it was so embarrassing. Caren, do you have a groceries memory that you could tell us?
I do. I remember, so I'm 10 years older than Julie. I had somewhat of a more maternal or mature perspective with it. I remember returning soda bottles. We were big fans of Diet Coke and we would accumulate the bottles, but nobody wanted to return them. So I was very industrious trying to accumulate some money. And I would go and collect all the bottles and go back to the store and return them.
Oh, I love that. So you got like the 5 cents deposit back?
Yeah, I don't know. I hope it was
Yes.
It may have been less. I don't want to really date myself on that. But I just remember that feeling that this was something that I could take initiative with and do.
I love that so much. And you know what was interesting about asking Seth about groceries was they just magically appeared for him in his refrigerator.
Wow.
He'd never stepped foot in a grocery store. And so if you're thinking about our different experiences, right, that groceries just flew with a ferry into someone's refrigerator their whole lives, then like we said, how does that affect our kids about the assumptions of who should be doing what? And so we often talk about that with my kids. I'll tell you a quick story about how we talk about things. We talk about things pretty deeply. I woke up the other day and I said to Zach, I want to tell you, Zach's 14 now. I said, I want to tell you about, and he's way on TikTok and very into a lot of these YouTubers and tells me about Andrew Tate, who's this like toxic male.
Oh, yeah.
So we have really deep conversations. And we were at this bar mitzvah 6 nights ago. And I said to Zach, I want to tell you about 2 conversations I had last night. I said, one, I was standing next to a friend who's a doctor, and his friend came over, and the doctor I'm friends with introduced himself. Let's pretend his name is Richard. Richard's friend came over, introduced himself, and he said, yeah, Richard's one of the best doctors I know. And I said, yeah, I know he's great. And he said, yeah, but you don't know is he added 2 inches to my dick. And what I said back to this man is, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that. You just confirmed my hypothesis that white men are so mediocre. And I just walked away. But that happened. And then another good friend of mine, who's a wealth advisor who, you know, exists in normal world. It was a party where we were all dressed up in jerseys. It was Jersey party. And this guy said to me, Eve, how do you think our friend is going to fuck his wife tonight when she's wearing his son's jersey? And I said, oh, okay. And then I just like walked away, didn't answer that either. And I said to Zach, those are 2 very accomplished. One is a doctor, one is a wealth advisor, and they're talking to me like that. Zach, you know, why do you think they feel entitled to be able to say those things? And so Zach and I had a really great long conversation about what men think. Is it okay to say those things if women aren't there? And finally, then he said to me, well, is there really a doctor that adds 2 inches to your dick? You know, or whatever, you know, I was like, no. But the point is these conversations we have about misogyny and sexism, they are not conversations for the faint of heart. And I wouldn't suggest you just launching into them with your child if you don't lay that foundation. But the foundation you can lay to have these conversations that I think are really, truly life-changing are to start with the Fair Play cards. We have them online. You can get the free tool of them. Start just telling your stories.
I love this twist that I hadn't thought of about how to use the deck. But I also just want to say, I do think we often underestimate the kinds of conversations that are going to be interesting to our children and their ability to understand things. So the last 2 nights, my husband, Chris, my younger son, Jacob, who's now 10 in 4th grade, and I have been watching the Fair Play documentary. And after we got about halfway through the first half of the movie, and I stopped to just check with Jake to say like, okay, you know, what are you thinking about this? What are you learning? And he really got a lot of it. I mean, he said, I didn't know that about women not getting paid as much. I asked him what he thought of it. He's a big fan of bad words. So he also loved the documentary because you use a number of them throughout. He was so happy. He's like, I really like this movie. But, you know, he said, that's bullshit. And then I asked him about invisible labor, and he really got the concept. And he said, there's a lot that you do that I probably don't see. I'm glad that we went deep here because I think this is one of the potentially most transformative aspects of bringing in Fair Play and the cards into our homes. Not only the shift in our relationship with our partners and having them become amazing role models, but the bringing this all to light and being in conversation about these issues with our kids.
I do want to say one thing quickly before we transition and for passion and purposeful jewels. Eve, I know I mentioned that I felt like I bared some responsibility in not having equal expectations of both of my kids, and that maybe I did not instill the awareness in my son to the level of what I did with my daughter. However, I think observation, just raising observant and thoughtful kids, we could really be surprised in terms of what their takeaway is. And I have two quick things to note about that. One is that in terms of the market, my daughter often, but my son very reliably goes with me every Sunday morning to the farmer's market because I'll often get things because
I love that.
And it's too much for me he doesn't want me to be burdened with carrying everything by myself. And my birthday was on Sunday. I couldn't go and he went for me. So I think they do through observation and want to be reciprocal in terms of the kindness and love that they've observed from their parent. And the other thing I want to say, just in terms of what kids can observe, and I wish I had this fair play deck when they were growing up, is when my son was in middle school, they were on lockdown and I was at work and I worked 30 miles away. And I remember my babysitter went to pick him up and there was a SWAT team in yellow tape and we didn't know what was going on. We heard that there was an active shooter. Thank God it wasn't the case. And finally, after I was at work, and I realized I didn't know what to do. And then I was waiting because they said, we'll call you back. And then finally, my friend was like, no, get in your car and go home. And I just was crying hysterically, like, oh my God, that didn't even occur to me. And I remember Josh calling as I was getting on the freeway. And he's like, Mom, I'm okay. Your work is way too important. You don't need to come home.
Oh.
And I just remember thinking, okay, no, active shooter, SWAT is definitely the trump card over my work. Anyway, just a little anecdotal thing about what observing can do.
Well, absolutely. And what he was basically saying to you is your time is important. And I'm not assuming you're going to use your time on me. And I think it's a gift for a child to say that to a parent.
Absolutely. We are going to do the next two guideposts, 3 more lightning round fashion. The next guidepost P is about passionate and purposeful impact beyond our family, beyond that role of mother-parent. Caren, what question would you like to hear Eve share about related to that?
As I'm saying, from blueberries to just the big world stage, did you ever think that little kernel from your self-experience could transform itself on such a large scale to impact the world internationally, having just spoken in front of the UN? You know, when you conceived of this idea to where you are today, speaking on Good Morning America before the podcast, did you ever conceive of having that platform?
What a good question. No, I think the place Julie was talking about, that place of depletion before we could reclaim our passion and our purpose, was where I thought I'd always be, Caren. But I think the beauty is it just takes a small investment. And so to start a passion and purposeful life, if you are stuck of where to start, this will actually relate to the C in the framework. So that's good. We can sort of kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or I don't love that term, whatever. Foster the love and life of 2 birds with 1 stone. But the passion and purpose, if you feel stuck, well, how could I even begin? I like to say, just focus on one of 3 things. Passion and purpose, what we call this epic life, or what I call unicorn space, this idea that you can have consistent interest in your own life as the antidote to burnout, not a walk around the block, not a random axe throwing night with a friend, which are important too, but consistently being interested in your own life is the antidote to burnout. Start with either one of 3 C's. Start with curiosity. Say, I'm going to focus on curiosity this week. I want to wonder about something and I want to answer some questions based on that wonder. And not, as my friend said, can I ask, I wonder why my child's poop is yellow? I said, no, that's not the wonder. I wonder for yourself. Or you focus on the second C, which is connection. And what that means is if you're feeling lonely, isolated, start to think about what it would mean to start forging those connections again. One woman did it by jumping into the Atlantic Ocean. She told me she found a polar bear club in her neighborhood and she wondered what it would feel like to jump in the Atlantic Ocean. She connected with others. And then finally, the third C is completion. So there's a funny meme that says, I can't finish this project because I'm working on my other 99 projects. If it's that, you have curiosity, you have connection, but completion is what you struggle with. Focus on where you're lacking and then just take it from there. Say, I care about curiosity this week. I care about connection this week, or I care about completion this week, and see where it takes you.
I love the 3 C's. I love a good framework and things that help us to remember the things that are most important. I feel like you've started to move us into the next guidepost. I invested in ourselves.
Yes.
That these 3 C's are a recipe for that. In reading through your latest book about unicorn space, I also noticed how much this idea of giving ourselves permission is a way to invest in ourselves. And it was actually a letter of permission that I wrote to myself at an Elizabeth Gilbert workshop the year before I said yes to Mother's Quest and living my epic life, that I feel like really planted those seeds for me to be able to reclaim myself. What have you learned in working with so many women and writing your book is the biggest key to us granting ourselves that permission?
Well, I think it's either 3 things. I think one, it's believing that you deserve time for yourself, right? That's the time discrepancies we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. And you do. We know in society, I wrote a whole book about it. That's what fair play is, that we treat men's time as if it's finite. We protect it like it's a diamond, and we treat women's time as if it's infinite, like sand. And that really affects us over time, because if you believe your time is infinite in sand, or that it'll never run out, or other people treat it that way, then one day you're going to wake up and you're not going to have any choice over how you use that time. So that's that reclamation, that permission to be unavailable. But the other 2 things to invest in yourself are that we have to believe we have a permission to do those things without guilt and shame, because guilt and shame ruin the investment. It's like a crypto investment. It's like you're investing in a currency, but it's the wrong one. It is not okay to carry guilt and shame with you when it's not your burden to carry. And so what I recommend there in a lightning round is to start thinking about times where you can change from I feel guilty because I didn't put Anna to bed, and instead change that framework to say, I made that decision because I made the decision not to pick up my son from school when there was an active shooter, because I found out there actually wasn't, that they were completely safe. They were completing their day. He was in a safe environment. I spoke to him on the phone. So instead of saying, I feel guilty because I didn't get to school on time, you say, I made a decision because. And again, it gives you some more agency. And finally, the last piece that you need to invest in yourself is to be able to ask for what you need from others. And that's also what we said in the beginning. There's a lot of discomfort with that. Other people will not be doing cartwheels when you ask for boundaries, but you deserve them.
Those are so powerful. And I think what a difference a language shift can make. In particular, I feel like I want to put on a big Post-it, I made that decision because, and keep that at the forefront of my mind. Well, we already touched on the last guidepost C, but Caren had a particular question about this. So she can ask you, but then we'll need a really succinct response so we can move to the next part.
Okay, perfect. Lightning round. Okay.
So at the very beginning of the precursor to fair play was your should I do list, and reaching out to your friends to find commonality, connection if they were experiencing the same things as you were experiencing. And then I remember you referencing the time that you all went to go have brunch and then everybody had to leave. Considering that the original group of where your connections, who you were connecting with, how have your connections transformed or changed over time in terms of your support network? Now that you have not only your nuclear family in life and role as an individual, but this fair play as a platform that you're teaching and integrating and putting that education out on a grander scale out there into the world. How have your connections changed, and what's different in your support network?
So this is actually the biggest challenge. It's this idea of being around people who serve you. And I talked so much about this in my second book, that we deserve spiritual friendships, Caren. And that's what I will say, what you and Julie have here. You have a unicorn space, right? Because you have curiosity about a topic, you have connection with each other, and then you complete something. You actually put it out into the world, even if it's not perfectly edited, right? So whether you make $1 from this or $1 billion from this is a unicorn space. It's important. And so I would say continue to invest in it. The greatest challenge is that so much of what we want to do when we're in a reclaiming mode, as Julie was talking about earlier, is delicate. And as one woman said to me, who ended up bringing the American Ninja Warrior buzzer as the oldest woman and mother to do so, she said to me, so many of our dreams are delicate. And so we have to be careful who we share them with. We want to share them with spiritual friends, people who are invested in our success as an accountability partner, which is somebody who says, I support you on this journey, or a success partner, someone who says, I accompany you on this journey.
I love that. Can you repeat what those two are again?
So we know if you have an accountability partner for unicorn space or for something you're doing in your creative expression, you're 60% more likely to do it, which means somebody who is supporting you on that journey. Yes, Julie, you got this. You're going to run this marathon. You're going to do this ukulele concert. If you have a success partner, someone who runs with you or is going to play ukulele with you, goes to your lessons with you, your likelihood of completing what you want to complete goes up to 90%. And so it's a really important framework to understand that that connection piece is a really hard one because oftentimes it requires really being honest with yourself about who you let into and who accompanies you on your journey.
So Eve, we've covered so many incredible things. If you were to give us one challenge to help us more fully live our epic lives, what would you invite us to do?
Well, Caren and Julie, what I will ask you to do and then report back to each other as accountability partners is I want one day next week, I want you to report to each other that the most important thing you did that day was outside of your roles as a parent, partner, or professional. And you have to tell each other what it is. And then me, of course.
And we'll invite, of course, anyone from the Mother's Quest community to say yes to this. In the private Facebook group, I can open up a thread for people to also share with one another there.
Please. And you know, I love data. So anybody wants to share with me, please say that it can be shared so I can hear what you've done that week for one day where your most important thing is outside of those three roles as a parent, partner, or professional.
Caren, you say yes to that?
You say yes to that. And I'm going to say it's in my unicorn space because I will be doing it from traveling for work, which will happen to be in Europe, which involve shopping for fashion and trends. So whatever I say yes to is going to be duly serving me.
I love that. That's fine if there's a dual purpose. And I will say that that's the card. One of our creativity cards in unicorn space is finding, foraging, collecting. So if you're doing that, it can be for antiques, for clothing, for trends. So go lean into that beautiful experience.
I love that. Well, we're at the end of our time with you, but I hope there will be lots more connection in the future. This is when we get to acknowledge one another and just share anything that we're taking away from this conversation and this time together. Caren, why don't you go first?
Well, I just want to say that thank you for sharing this space, Eve and Julie, for me to be a fly on the wall in this conversation. It's such a motivating, uplifting thing to see how a seed from your soul can just blossom into something that provides nourishment to you, to your family, and to people like me who are just benefiting from all the wisdom that you spout. And I'm going to say that you are such an articulate person, even interspersed with all the F-bombs that are out. I'm going to go back and listen through because I couldn't even grasp all of the really unique ways in which I think I'm going to be informed about how to be more purposeful in my life.
Eve, what are you leaving with today?
What I'm leaving with today is the power of these unicorn spaces. And like I said, for me, it's just continue on, Julie and Caren, in your beautiful quest for curiosity, connection, and completion, because you are cultural warriors, also changing the world. So I appreciate it so much.
Well, Eve, I think you have an incredible gift for mining for data, for telling stories, for finding language that is so resonant and frameworks that really propel this forward. And like your husband said in the documentary, you've brought a megaphone to these important issues. So thank you for your mission, your voice in the world, and your time on this podcast today. So grateful for all you do. Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, visit mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and help us to spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.